Chapatis, basic unleavened whole wheat breads, are probably the world's most popular unleavened bread. They're so easy to make, they're nutritious, and they're delicious. And I'm going to show you how to make them. The first thing you're going to have to know is what sort of flour to use. For a start, you need whole wheat flour, but not ordinary whole wheat flour. I suggest you try to use Atta flour. Atta is not a brand. Atta is a variety of flour, whole wheat flour, which is imported from India. What it is, it's the whole wheat grains that have been finely milled into a very, very fine flour, which specifically lends itself to this sort of bread making. In fact, Atta flour is also known as chapati flour. You go to any Indian specialty shop and you should be able to purchase it. You can see that chapati flour is very fine in its quality. If you can't get a hold of Atta flour, you can use any sort of whole wheat flour, and you should sift it, however, very finely. So for that purpose you require a little flour sifter. Now there's also a few things you should know about equipment. There's not really complicated equipment involved with making chapatis, but you do need, for a start, a rolling pin. Now this particular rolling pin is an Indian style rolling pin, especially for making chapatis and other Indian breads. These are very easy to obtain also in any Indian specialty shop. Otherwise you can use the traditional rolling pin, either a marble rolling pin or a heavy wooden one. But I would suggest, if you can't get a hold of the Indian style, try to use a thin traditional rolling pin. You do need a nice smooth rolling board, and you also need some sort of hot plate. I'm going to use today a conventional cast iron griddle. You can, however, if you're into making chapatis in a big way, obtain one of these. They're called tava, and they're a specifically made type of hot plate for chapatis. They're curved and they're very light, and they're used for making one chapati at a time. But if you can't get a hold of one of these, any sort of cast iron hot plate will be fine. As far as your cooking medium is concerned, you just need a stove top with two available burners, one to put the hot plate on and one to roast the chapati over an open flame. If you have an electric stove, however, you might say, how is it possible? You can duplicate this by putting a grill across the electric ring so the chapati heats up very close to the ring but not touching it, and that will achieve the same result. So we're going to start by making our chapati dough. So as far as your flour is concerned, if you're using atta, you don't really need to sift it, because if you do, you'll find, practically speaking, there's nothing left in the sifter because it's so finely milled already. If you're going to use any other sort of wholemeal flour, you definitely have to sift it, take out all the wheat germ and the bran. Now for our recipe today, I'm going to show you how to make enough dough for about 6 or 8 large chapatis, or about 10 or 12 medium to small ones. So we've got here 1 3/4 cups of atta flour, into which we're going to put 1 scant teaspoon of salt. If you don't like salt, you can miss it out, although I find chapatis need a little salt. And just water. We're going to add between 3/4 and 1 cup of cold water. Now, that's all that's going in, just simply flour, salt and water. Now, one thing to know about making chapatis is just add a little water at a time so you don't go overboard, and you should pour it in and mix it around like this. You should always have extra flour on hand just in case you make your dough too wet, and also you're going to need flour to roll them in. Sometimes you're going to need more or less water than what the recipe calls for making chapatis, because sometimes when flour sits it soaks up water from the atmosphere, so the amount of water specifically for this recipe can be taken as a guide. As you can see here, the first step is to gather all the ingredients together like this into one lump, and that's the basic unkneaded dough. So as far as kneading is concerned, if you're familiar with bread making, you should be familiar with kneading. Kneading simply means to make a smooth, pliable dough by applying the pressure from your palms and the heel of your palm on the lump of dough for about 5 or 10 minutes in order to make it soft and smooth for rolling. For that you need a smooth surface and a bit of pressure from your hands. This is where the heavy weight has its advantage. So that's been about 10 minutes. It's a real workout. The dough is very soft and pliable, but I'm not going to cook my chapatis out of this dough straight away. What I like to do is to put my dough aside for about an hour or more in order to proof the dough a little, and in other words, allow it to mature somewhat. It makes much better chapatis. So over here, we've got a batch of dough that's been sitting for about an hour and a half, 2 hours. What happens, you find sometimes the dough becomes a little more moist when it sits around, but that's okay. These are going to be rolled in flour. So after the dough's been sitting, once again, give it another few seconds of kneading. Now you should sprinkle some flour on your rolling board, like so. Pull off a lump of dough, enough for more than one chapati, and roll it into a little snake, like so, and then cut it into pieces, like so. All right, take those off, take one of those pieces and roll it between the palms and press very hard between your palms till you get this spiral arrangement. Place this down on a floured board so that that spiral there is on top. Flour your rolling pin. Gently apply pressure from the rolling pin until you get an elongated shape, like that. You might need to flour your rolling pin as you go along, just to make sure it doesn't stick to the dough. Now turn that over 45 degrees and the other way over. Sprinkle some more flour on there and roll it out again. Notice here how we're getting more towards that circular shape that we're looking for. Often you'll find that your first one or two chapatis aren't round. That's just seems to be how it is. But generally as you get that motion going, they tend to regain their proper shape. So there we have a chapati, pretty round. It's very thin. It's evenly rolled all around. And now we have to transfer it to the hot plate. So I'll show you how that's done. You very carefully pick up the chapati with two hands and take it over very quickly and just drop it in one go on top of the hot plate. Now at this stage, don't touch your chapati for the first few seconds until you see some bubbles appear. There's no bubbles appearing yet. Chapatis are rich in fibre, vitamins B and E, protein, iron, unsaturated fats and carbohydrates, and they're also delicious. Now at this point in time, you shouldn't touch it at all with anything until you start to see little bubbles appearing. In the meantime, you can have your naked flame ready. Now if you look closely there, you'll see there's little bubbles appearing. These little bubbles means that the chapati is actually starting to cook. This will take between 30 seconds and 45 seconds for those first bubbles to appear. See those bubbles? Now we're going to turn it over, cook it on the other side. Now on the other side, the chapati starts to puff up even more. See, these brown spots are perfectly all right. They should be there. Now as this chapati starts to puff up, we're going to put our spatula down, pick up our tongs. And when it starts to lift itself up like this, you notice all these little places where it's lifting off from the pan. It's just about ready to go. So let's pop it on our flame, shall we? And carefully transfer your chapati onto the flame. There we are, one beautiful chapati, puffed up like anything. Let's turn it over. Beautiful. Lift it off the flame, transfer it onto a dish, and if you like, smear it with some melted butter. Most delicious combination, hot chapatis with butter. Well, there might only be one way to cook a chapati, but there's many ways to eat a chapati. You can eat it straight as it is, off the hot plate with lots of butter, or you can spread your favourite jam on top, or more traditionally, you can eat it with a full meal of vegetables and dals and things like that. Generally how it's done, some of the chapati is torn off, it's either dipped in the dal or it's used to scoop up some of the succulent vegetable.